with the information that's available to us.
You know what might be interesting, Neil, if we want to get Dan Winter in here for a little minute and interface with Geraldine, because he's very much along the same frequencies and the bloodlines and the lucidity and then Dan brings it actually into technology. So I wonder if Dan has been listening, because Dan, are you with us?
Yes. Just put my camera on 1 second. Yes.
Okay, that technology stuff, it's like, I know it's 20th century. So what did you think of what Geraldine was saying about all, I mean, it's very similar to what you're talking about, right?
You know, Geraldine is a wonderful healer too, and she's intuitive and a hypnotist, and and has more personal experience than me for sure. On the physics side, you know, we have tried to be even more specific. You know, what going to the next dimension means by frequency signature, etc. And but you know, the basic outline there is very useful. And where she mentions even a lucid dreaming as a focus of attention, that's what we've been teaching lately too. So we're together on this.
What about the bloodline stuff? Because you talk about and the fractal nature of bloodline evolution and the interbreeding and the green bloodlines as opposed to the red and blue. I know you talk about that a little bit, right?
Yes, no, that's what we want to do because I want to tell that story in my lecture actually, and that's exactly right. That basically we think that Enki, who would be part of the Anunnaki, had green blood, really, and called us Takadama, which means red, because he was shocked to see the way we had an iron-based blood, which happened when our ancestors were forced underground due to their wars. And that's part of the big story. And that's why chlorophyll and hemoglobin are the same molecule, basically.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what I saw. So I'm so excited. I can't wait to hear your presentation, Dan, because, yeah.
And Geraldine was with us yesterday. We had our advanced SSP group, and boy, do we have fun. So
yeah.
Right. Well, one more thing about the connection to your work and Geraldine is that the frequency of spin. Can you relate that to what Geraldine was saying, Dan?
You know, really, I think her concept that increased spin density is the issue is absolutely correct. That's the correct metaphor. And if you were talking to some physicists about that, you might need a few more details. And indeed, you know, if you do a power spectrum of the heart, for example, harmonic inclusiveness, and the brain, harmonic inclusiveness perfected by Golden ratio, that's the beginning of superposed axes of spin, the definition of the next dimension, which is specifically increased spin density and actually increased density, which is what those longitudinal nodes of sacred space are. That's why they say you go to the next density. What they mean is that's when you get leverage on bigger tornadoes.
But bigger consciousness field brain capacities as well, right?
Well, it isn't limited to the brain. In fact,
right. I didn't mean brain, but consciousness field, yeah.
Right. It's the size of the field of propagation over which you can be centripetal. In this case, a longitudinal array. That's the point, that we could define that electrically, actually. That's what we hope to go into. Yes.
Well, I just want you to slow down a little bit as you lecture, because you lose me after a sentence when you. So if you could explain some of the terms, but I think you and Geraldine, we should do a whole dialogue of that, Neil, like a whole day of something like that.
Geraldine's wonderful. Geraldine has this amazing aura, and Geraldine has the ability to keep guys from fighting. It's all good.
That's great. Well, I cannot even begin to explain it like Dan explains it, but Dan is the only person I have found that could explain it in the physics aspect. So I understand everything, but I cannot explain the way you do. So I'm really happy to see your presentation, Dan. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And thank you for being the psychologist and the hypnotist and the healer.
Thank you.
Geraldine, where can people find you, by the way?
Yes, my website is geraldineorozco.com if you want to get hypnotherapy or DNA reprogramming. And if you want to join the support group, you can visit me at hybridmother.com. Just happy to be of service, and thank you for having me. It's been an honor.
Thank you so much, Geraldine.
See you later, Geraldine.
Much love.
All right, Ellen, you want to officially introduce Dan?
Well, Dan is I'm always amazed at I mean, I have to listen to him over and over again. So when he talks here, hopefully the replay will start to sink in, because I've known Dan maybe, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years. I stayed at his beautiful place in the mountains, and he is accessing more. He's building technologies off of these insights into the evolution of spirit and consciousness. So Dan puts it into practical application. But that's the thing, Dan. Just slow down so you can define your concepts, longitudinal lines. I think I'm almost getting that concept, and the whole fractal field and the implosion technology. So it's so far out. I think, yeah, I just want to integrate it all because I want to get where you're at. That's what I'm saying, Dan.
Well, that's great. So, Alan, you care. And you're putting it together proves that we can all do it. So that's
Thanks. Well,
I'm taking notes. That's the only way I can follow you.
right.
Taking notes.
Well, I think you have a lot to offer, and the technology part is really what today's about, and the ET technology and how we're integrating the human vehicle with, as Geraldine was saying, the ET realms. We're starting to tap into those fields of ET lucid awareness. So, yeah.
Exactly. Well, yes, in fact, maybe we should start exactly with the question Alan just asked, actually. So what Alan is saying is that he wants to understand how you inhabit the array, really. And, if we define consciousness as the size of the electric field within which you are centripetal, in other words, how big is a tornado you can steer, and that's kind of old news. The new information is we know exactly what enables you to inhabit a larger and larger array, the fractal nest, as it were. We know the DNA, Earth grid, and zodiac, and the arrangements of the masses in the universe. They're all dodecahedral for a reason, because that's how golden ratio spacing works, which is the only possible 3D fractal, enabling compression. And the compression nodes in that standing wave array, which are simply electric charge, the ether, as it were, the nodes, the compression points, are where the up and down transverse electromagnetic inertia is compressed in the perfect matching opposing vortex, pinecones kissing noses, and emerge as what's sometimes called scalar or torsional, but it's more accurately called a longitudinal, which is compressional electromagnetic. And the compressional component of the EMF field, sometimes called scalar or torsional, sometimes called the vril, sometimes called the rainbow light body or the Kesjan body, literally what you take with you when you dream and die. That compression part of that array in the electromagnetics, electrical engineers don't understand much about. Sound waves they know are longitudinal, but the electromagnetics, all our communication is based on only the up and down transverse component, whereas the compressional part of that electromagnetic wave, which is the coherent part, which can go faster than light measurably, and we can go through just about anything, but only exchanges inertia with the transverse and therefore heat making at the compression nodes. In other words, the compression node in that array only can do action at a distance efficiently if it reaches another bounce point where the compression reconverges and converts again a component of that compressional longitudinal into transverse up and down. In other words, if you wanted to contain heat at a distance, which is the holy grail of all fusion physics and all the fun stuff, if you wanted to contain heat at a distance, the only way you could do it, wait a minute, I'm having one second, just bear with me. So to contain heat at a distance, you'd have to cross those longitudinal waves at a distance. It's what Tom Bearden used to call the Russian woodpecker. And in conventional physics, that's called how entanglement produces action at a distance through an Einstein-Rosen bridge. But a more accurate language for that is the fact that when the transverse up and down magnetics is going down that vortex light cone and gets to the tip of the light cone and compresses well, and emerges as compressional longitudinal, that goes through the speed of light. And by the way, that's the definition of a gravity wave directly by Tom Bearden's equations, that longitudinal EMF. At that point, that compression wave can propagate in all directions and only exchange inertia at the nodes in the fractal array, what you call sacred space, which is the only place that Kozyrev mirrors make telepathy, and the only place labyrinths work well, and the only place action at a distance works well, and the only place sacred space defined are those cross points where the compression node is exchanging inertia efficiently. For example, nuclear critical masses effect. So this is just a new way to talk about not only what is sacred space, what is the grid, and what is the array, but how higher dimensional intelligences propagate. So, you know, when physicists discovered the masses of the universe are arranged dodecahedral, just like the Earth grid and DNA, they didn't know why. And actually, it's charge distribution efficiency that not just enables the stabilization of gravity, called big entropy, but it enables the propagation of mind. It's literally ancestral memory, dream lines, dreaming tracks, song lines, all the good stuff. So that's the physics of inhabiting that array. And when you feel that great charge density in your body, like when Daniel Brinkley gets hit by lightning and has near death twice, he inhabited the array because he got to the still point, which is just what Kundalini feels like. and so access to that still point enables you to compress into that array, which also is why successful death is clearly a small black hole. It's a compression event. Anyway, so I don't know if I've answered Alan's question very well, but I've tried to say, you know, if the nature of the array that is, for example, the only place ghosts can actually go after death if they want to be released. They're looking for the power point, the compression spot in the room, actually. And releasing ghosts is a good indicator of successful compression, because that's what death is designed to do. It's the reason you see your whole life in an instant before you die, because you have to do that compression well, otherwise you can't enter into the discipline of that distribution. A cup of tea here. So, but that was just to talk about Alan's question. So the conversation that I had prepared for this evening, and it's evening over here, it was, you know, the theme of this conference is the ET races and ET technology. I think I'm pretty good actually at ET technology. For example, rejuvenation, med beds, Therify, plasma, and also propulsion, and also the plasma physics of advanced intelligences. And for example, in the last couple of weeks, I've made 3 major films with Elena Danaan, whom I admire greatly. One of them was on the physics of the propulsion of UFOs. And the short summary is, yes, a Mercury vortex is the impulse power, and an imploding piezo quartz lithium niobate, that niobium crystals in Stargate, the warp drive. That's the warp propulsion. It's in modern physics, it's called Kopsky frost. And the second film we made was on the plasma physics of the advanced intergalactic intelligences, which is called the 9. And that's what we wish to talk about now, how that is rooted in the story of Thoth in the ET history of Earth. And that's one of the subjects I wish to try to delve into at the moment. And the third film we made just a few days ago is on the physics of stargates and portals. And Elena's audience is huge. We had 50,000 views, that kind of thing. And for people who want to, you know, I consider probably the best review of the extraterrestrial races is Elena's book, Gift from the Stars, in which she has very detailed drawings of, like, I don't know, over 100 extraterrestrial species, where they come from and their story. It's I think, and she started with a Russian summary and then added to it dramatically with her Pleiadian and Andromedan Federation context, and did a great job. And the point I'd like to make, one point I'd like to make that I find exciting about working with Elena Danaan and having worked with Alex Collier years ago, and friends with Michael Salla, exopolitics.org. The point I'd like to make is that, you know, I have been actively, almost quasi full-time, researching the extraterrestrial history for over 30 years. And I have, I mean, dozens, hundreds of sources, the Peshmerga, Hopi, Wingmakers, my Montauk friends, many of them, I knew them personally. Anton Parks, worked with him for many years. Alex Collier, Phaseus, personal telepathic contact with Phaseus Mornay of the Andromedans, although Alex Collier has more for sure. And then interstellar mediator who knew Swaru long before Gosha. And we know the Pleiadian Swaru story a lot better than And my connection with the Cherokee and the Aradowie, which was the Aboriginal, the Valnapa, all of which we now call Ophane and Minokian. I work with all these people personally. And of course, I have a bunch of John Dee memories. And you know that story. The point I wanted to make was, look, all those sources, if you put them all together, it turns out they all agree. There is now consensus. Alex Collier and Elena Danaan and Michael Sala and I, this story has complete consensus, and it fits what the SSP states people are reporting as well. So in fact, we have a meaningful galactic history which puts Earth history in context, and it is relatively compelling. And so of course, now my task would be, okay, well, tell me that story. Can I do it in 20 minutes? And I actually, have been telling that story for 20 years. And all of my work telling this story is at fractalfield.com/fusion in the blood. However, now I feel that there's some radically new pieces of the story that have emerged even in the last few months, largely due to Elena Danaan having reconnected to us to Only Planet of Choice, which is the story of the Nine, which I had been working with in Australia for years, and that discovering that is the Cedar races, literally self-acknowledged to be Thoth having returned with the intent of the Intergalactic Federation to revisit what they seeded on Earth, because now this is what Vincent Bridges called the galactic core cultures or the Cedar races. And many of the ancient indigenous cultures on Earth had a name for this advanced kind of supervising Cedar intelligences. I mentioned the Hopi Peshmetan, literally the way of the Nine. And the Nine are referred to in depth in the Greeks, Ennead, and in the Japanese, the Nine Roofs of the Pagoda, and Dante's Nine Steps to Inferno. I mean, the Nine are Egyptian and Greek. The Nine are, and so in our slideshow, I show the plasma physics of why actually there are, because 9 superposed toroidal magnetic plasma domains do self-organize. This is a report and a picture right out of Los Alamos. I mean, the 9 is real plasma intelligence physics, and how these plasma intelligence inhabit great interstellar spaces is the subject of our story. So the point I'm making now is, well, we have been tracking our friend Anton Park's reporting in such incredible detail on Enki's episodes on Earth, basically, and his science engineer partner, Thoth, Tahuti, Hermes, Quetzalcoatl, Viracocha, many names for the same guy. And now suddenly, my old friend Paulden Jenkins, who came to my Glastonbury lectures, edits this book, Only Planet of Choice, in which he reports in detail on my other old good friend, Andrea Puharich, having started their experiences with the 9, and which is how Roddenberry came to write Deep Space Nine, in which he discovered that not only locating next to the plasma vortex wormhole time tunnel was value in real estate, but that when you enter the plasma vortex, this 9, this wormhole, you are subject to the intent, the intelligence, the mindfulness of the interstellar plasma wormhole itself. In other words, the wormhole you just entered for transport has a mind, and it better like you. This was Roddenberry's theme for Deep Space Nine, but guess what? So the specific piece of the ET history story that has a major update now, thanks in part to Elena Danaan reporting on the Intergalactic Federation having just shown up in hundreds of giant starships just outside Jupiter, the Ganymede meetings. And the guy that's sort of running the show, the leader of the 9, well, if you just turn the pages of Deep Space Nine, I mean, Only Planet of Choice, says, oh, Puharich first thought the guy who was talking to him was Tom. I mean, I was there. And later says, oh, no, it's Atun. Oh, Atun, okay. And then later he said, oh, well, really, that's kind of Enki. Enki was, Enki's partner, Thoth Hermes, is Tahuti, which means Tehute, which was later translated TWD, DWD. The line of David in Israel is a name for the bloodline of Thoth. Oh, the guy gets around. And then you discover the name for what's called the Harusham Su, the hero gods of Egypt before the dynastic kings, Harusham Su, which are named Thothmosis, which transliterated means sons of Thoth, Tahuti. Oh, same guy seems to get around. So there's a new piece of the story to fit into our little fairy tale that we've been weaving for 20 years. And here's the new piece of the story. Elena Danaan says that the Anunnaki were not actually the same as Draco Siakar, but they arrived from the same segment of the Orion Nebula, which is big and has lots of intelligent civilizations. Hint, because, and we have a slide of this, like it's pictures in the moon, but the ancient Japanese woodcut of the plasma geometry of Orion is two great big plasma cones. And that just means that the geometry of the gravity field of Orion is a perfect double vortex, and it is huge. And you know what that makes? A good spot for a Stargate, a portal, because the more you can get implosion at multiples of golden ratio times the speed of light, which is literally definition of how many next dimensions are in there, the farther that Stargate can squirt you. In other words, the more you can get the gravity lenses focused to what's called phase conjugation, the more powerful that Stargate. Well, guess where all of the wars started? You know, on the planet Earth, it's called Uru Asa LN. Uru, Draco blood, Asa, queen of royal, El, place of the phase shift, translation of vorticity, Elohim, which is literally means Stargate, because El as in Elohim means translate from transverse to longitudinal EMF, which is how you lucid dream and take memory through death and get interstellar. So Uru Asa LM, Jerusalem, is the name of the Stargate on planet Earth, which, that's where all the wars started. So why is the war always over the Stargate? Well, you know, it's like real estate, location, location, location. So the access to transport, that's why teaching the physics of how Stargates work is useful. And that's in our slideshow. Basically, this is in the context of say you're going to say it, and then say it, and then say you said it. So before we get to the slides, I'm going to tell you the point of the physics of Stargates and portals. Remember when you looked at all the Stargates and portals, whether it's the giant water bubble in the underground arc that JP told Michael Salla is a Stargate portal, and you can hear the infrasound holding that giant bubble of water suspended midair as all of the beings are portaling in and out of that transport device. And all of the movie pictures of Stargate, what's at the surface of the Stargate? It's like a surface of a bubble of water, isn't it? So what's happening at that surface? Well, therein has to be the physics lesson. And the physics lesson actually ain't complicated. Remember we're going to show these pictures too, but where you take the ancient letters of Ophanim Enochian, and that was what on the periphery, the letters, sacred letters, on the movie Stargate, and the symmetry of those plasma donuts in a hypercube is what Ophanim Enochian angel alphabets are. So if you steer the plasma donuts in that hypercube called Ophanim Enochian, which is angel alphabets, which is angel body creation, if you steer those plasma domains toward that liquid surface, and they arrive in phase called phase conjugation. In physics, they call that time reversal, by the way. And what happens at what's called the liquefaction point is that the implosive compression of the transverse component of all your body's charged fields, all your atoms basically, is liquefied and propagated into what would technically be a gravity wave, which is what a longitudinal field propagating. But that gravity wave, longitudinal EMF propagation, which goes down this wormhole vortex tunnel, Einstein-Rosen bridge, has to bounce between the centripetal nodes. And there's actually a kind of a lightning bolt between the send point and receive point. And the way the send point and receive point works in a Stargate is that there's a very complex frequency signature, especially in the high frequency component of the conjugation. And there has to be a perfect match, because this is a giant array, literally these compression nodes of sacred space. And the addressing mechanism of that array can be described almost exactly the way IP internet protocol works, which is the send point, receive point, the destination address has to match. Well, in this case, the destination address is the frequency signature, which can unpack that same compressional array wormhole vortex lightning bolt, which has been sent through the Stargate portal. And so the whole complexity is to make the impedance match perfect complex frequency signature send point, receive point, and that creates the receive point in the Stargate, actually. And this, remember, and again, our film on the physics of Stargate's portals, like 20 to 50,000 views now. You can watch the film, Elena Dinan's YouTube channel. We describe how to start learning about how Stargates and portals work is to understand when we propagate the same conjugate plasma vortex with the phase conjugate array into two pinecones kissing noses called Therify.net, doing commercial rejuvenation in 25 countries. It's replicably documented in feedback, often creates lucid dreaming. Well, helps to trigger, actually. You know, you still need some good hygiene to do it well, but it helps to trigger lucid dreaming. And the reason is instructive, because a Stargate portal is just a very dense lucid dream. That's what it is. So in last night's, we called it the A-team of SSP experiencers, and Geraldine was with us. It was great fun. I recommend the film on our movie channel, youtube.com/Dan Winter Fractal Field, 1.5 million views. But anyway, we had with us, we're grateful, Jean-Charles Moyen, who is the hero representative of the French branch of the SSP secret space program, very famous, made a bunch of movies now, South Shore. And his experience of lucid dreaming is just, well, there I was projected on the beach. And then when I arrived back in my bed from the lucid dream, there was sand between my toes from that beach, and my parents witnessed and proved it. Ooh, was that a lucid dream? Or, you know, and then another time he came back from a lucid dream and he had a bottle of water that he got in the dream, and it was healing water. Was that a lucid dream? Or, so it's just like, as we've said before, Jodie Foster in Contact, you know, well, she got back, and did she have intergalactic travel in the dodecahedron, or was it a lucid dream of her father? Oh, well, it was both. And the physicists couldn't figure out the difference. Oh, why couldn't they figure out the difference? So in the lucid dream, you begin to propagate in the array coherently. But as you take more charge density with you, remember in the famous book, it was called 9 Faces of Christ, I think, and the initiate, in this case, presumably Jesus, is learning that he's been kept in isolation. And the only way you can go see your lover is if you go in a lucid dream. And the first time he lucid dreams, goes to see his lover, well, I can see her, but I can't smell her. And then next time he says, oh, if I get more coherent, I can take another organ of perception with me. So what you inhabit that array with depends on your coherence, obviously. And this is not just a metaphor, this is the physics. So basically, a phase conjugate array, creating that implosive propagation properly arranged. And that's why the advanced ET races, even on Earth, they will use the natural sacred sites for the Stargates, because the natural implosive centripetal forces there are more amenable to, and as well as, of course, ancestor phone calls. And that's how Korotkov measured sacred space, by measuring the fractality of the air. And where you make ancestor phone calls is where you make Stargates. What it is, it's a longitudinal node. And this then plays a role in our ET story, which I am going to get around to telling here, which is because when the Galactic Federation first blew up Tiamat, causing the Great Flood, the Dryad, about 10,000 years ago, they were chasing the Nebu, Draco, Gray, Siakar, and Anunnaki, and they wanted to trap them here. And they put, well, first of all, I guess we have to go back a little further before we tell that story, because we need to put it in context. So here's the context. This is fairy tale for your grandchildren or history, both. Remember, Elena and others, and the Pleiadians and the Andromedan version of this story all agree that there were tens of thousands of humanoid species in this galactic quadrant alone, and there's billions of galaxies, so we should remain humble in this process. But the humans were interesting because of the potential genetic diversity, which gave them some leverage over the dream and some creativity that made our DNA very interesting. But that's what we're going to come to in our story. So the humanoids in the early time were based largely in Lyra Vega. And this is Prism of Lyra, and I like to acknowledge Lisa Royale, having had lunch with her so many times in Phoenix with Ron Holt, Flower of Life. What the Prism of Lyra is the fact that the humanoid diaspora from there began because the beginning of the Orion Wars. They were called the Wars of Expansion. And how it happened, we call them Draco or Uru. Elena calls them the Siakar. And actually, Michael Helis told us the story of the Siakar 30 years ago, actually. They were a warring race. They were viciously conquering. But remember, you see, you immediately think, well, are they bad? Are they the bad guys? Well, yes, but their genetics were powerful. And a certain part of the Draco Uru DNA, specifically the white Draco, became the key to ensouling the humanoid genetic experiments, which became the Adamic race experiments of Enki and Thoth. So their survivalistic, the power in that DNA was part of the magic recipe used by the Seeders, Thoth, now returning as the 9 on Ganymede. And the psychokinesis that resulted is an important part of our story. Yes, they were the bad guys, but anywho, so the Draco Siakar, there was a breakdown in negotiations on their arrival in Lyra, and they decided to blow up the place. And millions, if not billions, of humanoids died, and there was a huge diaspora, which eventually led to humanoid civilizations spreading very widely, especially Pleiades, Sirius, and indirectly Earth. Now, meantime, we knew that from Anton Parks that whom we call Enki, who was later called Osiris, a green face on every statue in Egypt because he looked like a frog, and he had the green blood, actually. And he was later called the Ra, as in Abraham, the line of Abraham. And he basically wakes up in a cloning cooking pot from the Anunnaki in Pleiades, who they have been having various skirmishes with the female-dominated Pleiadian, at least the Tegatan Pleiadians are very female. They're 70% female, and they have some issues around that, by the way. Anyway, so when they ran for their lives and headed for the solar system, which was like, the far side of town, eventually the Galactic Federation chased these relatively parasitic and violent Draco, Siakar, and Anunnaki races to Earth. And so the Enki's extensive genetic experiments, his name was Nudimud, the cloner on Earth, was a big part of a major branching of the human genetic. As we were just discussing, they had green blood when they were underground, but when they emerged, they substituted the, I think was it the magnesium with iron from chlorophyll became hemoglobin. And I have a picture of that molecule here too. And so it went from green blood to red blood, and famously called Adam meaning red, the Adamic race, Adam and Eve. And the Enki was so fascinated because he had never seen a creature exhibit compassion before, actually. And also, another part of that story that's not well understood is in Anton Parks, when he's saying, well, Enki he's spent thousands of years learning how to be a good cloner, Newtonwood. But one day he wakes up and his mother had snuck in some genetics into his cloning cooking pot. And he was shocked because, and this is not a racist remark, it really is not racist, because Enki's blood group was literally the Black Pharaoh lineage. The Black Pharaoh story is part of the Enki story for sure, the Nubian, which also relates to the Ethiopian Ark story, the Dark Pharaohs. But the moment when Enki's mother, who was, you see, this is the point. Now, this is what we understood recently. Now we understand that what accompanied Enki here with his Anunnaki family, it's obvious from reading Anton Parks that the Anunnaki family, Enki's father, Anu, is basically a parasite. I mean, humans for them are only useful for slaves and snack food. It never even occurs to them that humans could be good for anything besides slaves and snack food. And Enki, on the other hand, he's sort of an artist with his cloning, and he wants to create something magic. Well, his mother is sneaking in some extreme psychokinesis into the humanoid genetic experiment. And this is also related to the science partner for Enki, Thoth Hermes, and the intent behind Enki's mother and Thoth Hermes in creating this, and this the magic that his mother snuck in blood was the high white queen, white Draco blood. And again, this is not a racist concept. This is about the physics of the blood, because the Draco, you have two different branches, a red Draco and a white Draco. When you think red Draco, think Rothschild, red shield. Yeah, that's red Draco. The white Draco is the white queen of the Draco, who is the hive mind queen, really centripetal. And Johann Fritz had a major meeting with the white queen of Draco. And I'll tell you, just to survive that meeting is an incredibly surprising thing, to survive the meeting with the white queen of the Draco. And by the way, the hive mind queen of the Greys, the Khmer, is also a white queen, actually, we believe. Anyway, point being that the white Draco blood, and did I mention the two branches of the Draco blood, white and red, were based on the fact that the electron transport mechanism of their lipid oil-based blood was based on white versus red phosphorus, which is why there's white Draco blood. Anyway, so they thought this highly powerful, psychokinetic, really powerful bloodline of the White Queen was, quote, unclonable. And somehow that kind of psychokinesis was how Enki, with his mother in the background, sneaking that very powerful DNA into us, our genetic experiment. And that's somewhere correlated to when Enki gets his first fertile female. Oh, exciting moment. Now, the new piece of this puzzle, remember, I've been telling this story for 20 years. The new piece of this puzzle is, oh, Elena Danaan has informed us, I think correctly, that the Anunnaki had come through the same Stargate in Orion, and they were basically parasitic. Remember Enki's father and his father Anu and his brother Enlil, later called Yahweh, basically parasitic, no question. But they were famous for hating humans. It ain't rocket science. But somewhere there was an agenda to create psychokinesis. Where'd that come from? Well, you know what Anton Parks calls it? He calls it the Kadistu. Remember when we said the great cedar races? He said the Kadistu is from where we get the word caduceus. Hint, symbol of Hermes. Oh, Thoth. Oh, same guy. Today we call that phase conjugation. So the Kadistu is also from the word from which we get Kiristu, the Christ. And Anton Parks does a pretty good job on this history, I think, actually. And so suddenly, now you understand, when I did this, we did this whole new film on the fact that Thoth, the Thoth bloodline, Thoth Moses, the royal line of Egypt, Akhenaten becomes then, Akhenaten changes his name to Moses and becomes the righteous priest of the Essenes. And guess what? That's the Jesus story. And when you read the Advanced Templar history of that bloodline, literally Magdalene is the daughter of Thoth. So suddenly this Thoth guy with this genetic agenda is responsible for the royal lineage of Egypt, the royal lineage of Christianity, the Kiristu. I mean, it all comes down to the same story. So what was the agenda? Oh, and now these galactic core cultures, cedar races, self-described as the manifestation of the lineage of Thoth. I mean, if you read Only Planet of Choice, who is the nine? Oh, well, is it Atu and Enki? Well, really, I am Thoth. Okay. Intergalactic, I mean, this is not the Galactic Federation. This is the Super Galactic Federation. This is high leverage. And they arrive in like hundreds of powerful ships outside of Ganymede, and they have these very high level meetings. Yes, we came back to see if the seeding was successful. Well, who was seeding? Oh, Thoth Hermes. Oh, what was their intent? Well, if you look at how even the Draco now need the humans, guess what the Draco's problem was? Loss of long-term memory. Inability to take memory through death. Huh. We would call that loss of soul. Oh, so, I mean, I have described this in the past as a vaccine for the Orion Wars. Like, we could be the vaccine for the Orion Wars. That's big. And that vaccine specifically would be, they turn to humans when they need creativity. They don't turn to us for technology. No, our technology is boring. But for creativity and for what we call ensoulment. Remember, when the Dracos paid the Greys, the Khmer, whom Elena calls the Nebu, to do the abductions, 90% had some indigenous blood, meaning most of them were lucid dreamers. Why did they need the lucid dreamers? Their DNA had longitudinal coherence. Ooh, what was that called in Star Wars? Microchloridians in the blood. What was it called at Montauk? It wasn't called deep sleep. It was called, oh, I gotta think of the word in Montauk. I knew the Montauk boys talked about that too. It was the frequency signature based on the 9 in the blood was actually a predictor at Montauk measurably of who could steer the time chair, the wormhole at Montauk. Same story, psychokinesis. So that's a bit of the flavor. And just to complete that part of the story we were telling. So when first of all, when the Dracos first killed millions of humans in Vega and Lyra, the humanoids were losing clearly for many thousands of years, clearly. However, eventually they got their show together and they banded together. And the major Galactic Federation now began primarily with the Andromedans and the Arturians. However, now there are hundreds, if not thousands of races in the Galactic Federation, which is a very law-abiding culture, even though Swaru Gosha currently criticizes this just because the present Swaru is basically AI. It's bad news. But the big picture, which the Galactic Federation is, which is correctly agreed on by everybody else, Michael Sala, Elena Denon, Alex Collier, myself, all the SSP experiencers, we all agree on the story. And here's the story. So when the Galactic Federation finally got their show together and decided it was time to chase the Nebu, the Greys, Khmer, Siakar, Draco, who had seriously infected the solar system, no question. So they arrived with a big fleet. And one of these events is on the order of the Dryad, which is 10,000 years ago, perfectly synchronized with Freddie Silva, and the 10,500 year Great Flood. And the Great Flood was because when the Galactic Federation fleet arrived here and starts a major, what you would call a nuclear war, they blew apart Tiamat, which is a largely water-based planet, and the falling water became the Great Flood, when Freddie Silva correctly describes, tens of miles high waves circumnavigating the Earth. This was a flood, man. And so what happened in that war basically was the solar system was almost destroyed. Mars lost its atmosphere. Tiamat was completely broken up and became the asteroid belt. And the Earth's orbit became unstable. And so they took an old Andromedan spherical hollow metal planetoid craft, they had a lot of those around, one that was pretty worthless, really. And they stuck it in here because its mass and diameter would fit that cone, which became our moon, the hollow metal moon. And they installed, and the moon wasn't there, I don't know, I'm not very good with dates, but tens of thousands of years, the moon wasn't there, actually. The moon is relatively new to Earth's history, really. And astronomers will correctly tell you today that the Earth's orbit would be highly unstable without that moon. And, but they did something else. They put a series of nuclear generators in that moon to amplify what is a harmonic series related directly to the Schumann harmonics. And that amplification increased the charge density of the Van Allen belts, which had the function only at that time of trapping the Draco and Anunnaki here. Because at that time, the Anunnaki, for example, were famous for being such klutzes they couldn't get through the Van Allen belt without nuking their way through. This is reported in many sources. And the container for those nukes was called the Ark of the Covenant, which is an implosive capacitor primarily designed for non-destructive containing radiation, which is why plague of Azoth means radiation poisoning, and why the guy babysitting the Ark now in Ethiopia dies every few years of radiation poisoning. So, but implosive capacitance will reduce reactivity measurably, and that should be taught. And that's why the golden ratio gold with the high dielectric acacia, et cetera. So that was a Syrian design. And it was, and it's true, the Mercy Seat, the two gold angelic wings, that ark could be inhabited by a very high, powerful plasma being. And indeed, you know, the hygiene for holding, for moving, for touching the Ark of the Covenant required both high voltage hygiene and radioactivity preparations, really. And we desperately need to understand more about how implosive capacitance reduces radioactivity, because otherwise we may be toast as well. But anywho, so that's a little bit of the history story. So where it becomes colorful was then, even before the nuclear generators in the hollow metal moon doing this frequency quarantine started breaking down, unfortunately, the Anunnaki and the Draco began using more advanced technology for transport, namely the Stargate portals. And once they learned to use Stargate's portals better, then this quarantine wasn't working anymore anywho. and so the Federation had to work very hard. And what they did, and this brings us more to the present day and has everything to do, I just made a film on this, it's called Extraterrestrial Nuclear Karma 101, that the primary reason the ETs arrived, for example, at Roswell, was because the humans had started using nukes. And the nuclear problem is such that the compression event of a nuclear explosion propagates in the longitudinal array in such a way that it disturbs advanced consciousness for light years in all directions. It's really serious bad news for advanced ETs. So as soon as the humans started messing with their nukes, I mean, we had their attention. So immediately they sent valiant Thor and said to Eisenhower, if you'll give up your nukes. And of course, Eisenhower was actually a good guy. However, his advisors wouldn't let him, So he got sucked into a treaty with the bad guys. At that time, the Federation sent the good guys, the tall whites and valiant Thor, and said, you know, here, Eisenhower, if you give up your nukes, we can help you. And unfortunately, so, you know, he didn't want to admit to losing to the Nazis anyway after Admiral Byrd got kicked out. So the Nazis had been helped by Maria Orsic, who was connected to several advanced ET races and had learned the physics of advanced ET technology, which is how a Mercury vortex makes gravity. And that we teach pretty in depth in the How UFOs Fly film with Elena Denon. But as I said briefly, that if the geometry of a Mercury vortex, which is doped with a wetting agent to allow the iron powder to remain soluble, making it a red mercury, and that implosive vortex would propagate a longitudinal wave at its center, which is how most of the medium tech extraterrestrials fly still today. They use a Mercury vortex, and they use that same Mercury in the pyramids for propagating the longitudinal ray, which was how the pyramids made global wireless power, actually. And so the advanced propulsion, as we said, was more the warp propulsion, which is this implosive piezo crystal called Koski frost. You can see the story at fractalfield.com/propulsion. where you see the Koski frost crystal, visualize lithium niobate, which is Scotty in Star Trek calls the niobium crystals, the warp drive. Actually, it's lithium niobate, which is triggered with a high frequency RF phase conjugate pump wave. And it actually made 800 times its own weight in gravity, Koski frost. Famous story. And so we understand both the warp propulsion and the impulse power. And that is within our grasp. If we humans could finally learn why an object falls to the ground, it all falls into place. But anywho, that then leads us to the storal to the Maury. and the moral to the story, and then the slideshow. The story of the Maury is that then the Galactic Federation watched in horror after Eisenhower Truman signed the treaty with the bad guys, the Nebu, the Greys, and got tricked into large massive abductions and basically using humans as cattle and human trafficking across the stars. It was horrible. And even the Dracos, who after even the Nazi Dark Fleet, having taken over the South Pole and kicked Admiral Byrd's ass, and then they put those Mercury vortex in submarines. They went to the moon, and when they tried to get a base on Mars, they lost 17,000 men, and the only way they could do it was by bribing the Draco with human slaves, actually. And that was the beginning of a huge human slave trade, which was shocking and horrible and bloody and disgusting and nauseating. And the Galactic Federation was watching in shock and horror. And they were so horrified that they actually had to make an exception to their prime directive rule, which was thou shalt not intervene with indigenous species because they'll never grow up. And they had to do something. So that's when the Galactic Federation arrived back here. And the Tegotan Pleiadians originally had the biggest guns, but they were parked on the Vieja triangular 600-kilometer cross starship from the Andromedans hidden behind the moon. And the Tegotan Pleiadians had the biggest guns. And apparently they did when they left, after they shot out the reptilian Kingus, mostly underground. Tegotan Pleiadians left, and they apparently did leave many of their weapons with Putin, we understand. And that's another messy, long story, actually, because at that time there was a breakdown between that branch of the Tegotan Pleiadians and the Galactic Federation. And that's what Gosha is so confused about. But the actual main Galactic Federation are the heroes here. They arrived back here in force. And over the past several years, they have quite thoroughly ejected the Nebu Grey Draco Siakar, not just from the underground military bases on Earth, but from Mars and the moon also. That's a huge accomplishment. And when we had, 10 to 15 of the advanced SSP A team in our video last night, and we did a round robin and said, is Elena Danaan right that they have finally booted the Dracos and the Greys out of here? The SSP experiencers agree. You see, the actual most parasitic extraterrestrial branches have been removed. Unfortunately, as Johann Fritz said, it's like you got the tick out of your arm, but that you still got messes in your blood. So yeah, they got the Draco out of here, but the traps they left in the government structures is something we humans have to deal with ourselves. And that's the karma that we're dealing with at the moment, as Elena Danaan, I think, correctly says. So the point is that here is the nice part of the story of that Maury, that although there are tens of thousands of intelligent humanoid cultures in this galactic sector alone, so don't just assume that we're special. However, and our technology is like, it's like going to prehistoric whatever. They want to come to see the museum here. No, our technologies, but we have a certain potential to teach lucid dreaming, to learn to take memory through death, what we call ensoulment, which actually now we know the physics of that. It's the ability to propagate a coherent longitudinal bubble around your aura due to successful compression, primarily related to bliss, hygiene, yoga, and kundalini, actually, that your aura can become compressed and dense enough to propagate in that array. So the physics of how to make a soul, sometimes called Humpty Dumpty's egg, and why the Dracos were messing with the royal bloodlines like we were show dogs for 1,000 years, because they couldn't put Humpty Dumpty's egg again together. They couldn't make soap. So that was a brief poetic telling of the extraterrestrial history, which is supposed to be something that your grandchildren can use to get a sense of context. And now, if I may, just a few of the images that go with that, and we'll do this brief because obviously we're going to run out of time here. This is called Ur the Nine. So this is the plasma physics I referred to. This is at Los Alamos, seeing why 9 nested toroidal plasma domains self-organized into a mind. And this became the Deep Space Nine story, actually. And my friend from Australia worked with Tony Peratt here. And so they found then these glyphs all over the world. This is plasma physics. No, it's shaman carvings. Oh, it's both, because the shaman are seeing living plasma. And so these stories are all at goldenmean.info/whale dreamers. And so this is, again, Dante's Inferno, and the reason the 9 is everywhere from Japan to Greece to Egypt, because indeed a story of the ancient 9 is in every one of those cultures, like the Hopi Peshmerga. And then the physics of the 9 is perhaps illustrated well. Here's from last Mimsy film, looking at the 3D animation of 9 3D golden ratio tetrahedron, making literally what is the Sri Yantra, which is the plasma physics of implosion between rotating tetrahedral domains. And here is the boy looking up and holding it just before he makes this giant storm with the plasma and finding the Sri Yantra in the solid state plasma circuit. And then he looks up in the stars and finds this great giant wormhole converges into, I don't know if you're seeing these animation, but it actually, that's right, there's the plasma physics of the 9, the Sri Yantra, and the star, the little children in the movie Last Mimsy. And so that I think Pat Flanagan helped us with the 9 golden ratio concentric tetra model of Sri Yantra. This is a golden mean Sri Yantra. And so here's the picture of the ratcheting of the golden ratio tetra in the Sri Yantra on the right, and here's the ratcheting dodeca in DNA on the left. This is my graphic, but originally inspired by Coxeter and Ann Ting. And so this is the implosion resulting in the DNA and the golden ratio in the central hydrogen bond, so that the zipper here is literally a phase conjugator. And then when the DNA braids recursively, you get ensoulment because it implodes. And this is the original text here. This is Ann Ting, Geometric Extensions of Consciousness, the original graphics, which she said was inspired by Coxeter in the golden ratio, not just in the vertical increment of turn, but in the radius of the turn. So and this is a lattice cobweb tunnel spiral, the way this recursive braid is then superposed, which literally is the next axis is charge spin symmetry superposed, called going to the next dimension. Literally, then you see this lattice cobweb tunnel spiral is what you will see at the moment of death, Heinrich Clouvet form constants, because you have to do that compression implosion to die well, to be propagated. And most of you have seen these animations. So, and this is the braid within the braid of the braid braiding, and that implosive coherent phase relationship between the short wave and the long wave in the recursive braid, triggered by the phonon geometry of coherent heart brain physics of bliss, measurably programming DNA. This is the Ur means ancient Draco blood, and An Agur, Bulgaria, Ural, Urup, Ibi, Uru. So the word Uru here means ancient Draco blood, Urusum Durga. And so you see how pervasive in our culture. This is, these are the Ophanium-Enochian letters on the Stargate, and this is the Ophanium-Enochian sigil of truth, 5 spins, 7 spins in the center. This is the names of angels in the tablet of Nalvaj, which is the index of the hypercube letters. And this is the names of angels, Adgiel, Raphael, etc. We've seen that. And this is from Darlene, Vincent Bridges' partner, beautifully graphing the excerpts of the plasma vortex, which became the Ophanium-Enochian alphabet, literally pieces of donuts. And if you nest them into a hypercube, you get the Ophanium-Enochian and the Stargate. And so this was the plasma vortex Anu, which the clairvoyant saw at the heart of the sun and saw in the heart of the human. and saw in the heart of hydrogen. Most of you have seen these pictures. And here's our model for that, the Star Mother kit, only 3D meant fractal, 7 spins, 5 spins. The 7 spins are the 7 spins tetracube, 5 spins are the dodeca. Little thing, the Nokia. And so this becomes the Hermes tablet of Hermes. And note the caduceus, Thoth. And even in the Bon Po, which means bonfire, this is actually the Grail animation in the Tibetan tradition. And so the emerald tablets of Thoth. This is what Enki looked like according to Anton Parks. Seen this before. Every statue of Osiris in Egypt has a green face because here's the green blood. So this is Anton Parks' work, and we did have a beautiful summary of that at fractalfield.com/Zeitman for Jerry Zeitman. And this is an example in the humans of reverting to Draco blood. This couple was born too close to Chernobyl and mutated till when their blood was actually benefiting from radioactivity, as does the Draco, actually. And because low-level radioactivity is actually a stimulant to electron circulation in their blood, in Draco blood, which is similar to the Paul Brown nuclear battery, that you have a modicum of electron superconductivity in low-level radioactive systems, the nuclear battery. So basically, planets on which radiation is increasing usually indicate the presence of Draco. And so these are the books in English from Anton Parks. And The Secret of the Dark Stars, by the way, spoiler alert, the secret of a dark star is the implosion vortex in the center of the dark star is your plasma ancestor. That's what the secret of a dark star is. And this is showing the two separate languages of the males versus the females when the sex wars broke out among the Draco, which became the Aboriginal marriage law, and it became the caste system in India, is straight Draco. And so when Joseph Smith was studying the old Akkadian Akaldan to interpret the Mormon tablets, in fact, he was studying the Draco female versus male language. And this is why the sex wars were inherited on Earth from the Draco directly, because they had a separate language for males and females. Now, we can't do all these slides, but this, remember, this is the picture of the Orion arm of our galaxy, and it's broken. And we are told that the major break in the Orion arm is the Orion Wars. Hello. This is the Japanese woodcut of the plasma geometry of Orion named Yod, He, Vav, He, Yahweh. And Yod and Vav are two opposing light cones, a Yahweh. And a real Yahweh is a being who can inhabit a pair of plasma cones which are interstellar. That's a real Yahweh. And Lil, however, was a wannabe. So this is one of the sources where you can see more detail on the story of the history of the moon and the galactic history of the artificial moon. This is from the Interstellar Mediator, the original source to the Pleiadians. And this is a link also at fractalfield.com/fusion in the blood. So here we're just talking about how William Thompson's story confirms all of this about how and why Admiral Byrd got kicked out of the South Pole and what that means. So this is Anagur. The ARR means a container or vehicle food or a artificial vehicle. B means container, Ra, you know what that means. So we're talking about the origins of human language in Draco Anunnaki language. For example, the word may, as in measurement, actually ME, as Sitchin got a few things correct, ME is the word for computer disk in Sumerian, actually. They had computer disks, they did, which relates to what Anton Parks called the gear cube or the fire crystal. So May Asa Uru means Asa, queen of Uru Draco, refers to the ME, the computer disk, to make a measurement. You just see, if you just dissect our language, the Shem is the Stargate altar. I will raise a Shem unto the Lord, which is, we called it an altar at church. Actually, a Shem is an implosive capacitance designed to produce age reversal. That's what the real meaning of the altar in the church. Arion, yeah, too many slides. But this is talking about Ebi versus Uru, the bird tribe, versus the dragon blood. And Ebi Uru means to cross over those bloodlines, to be a Hebrew. And you see the the roots of these words are very instructive for our history. And this is the Sumerian bloodline history. Again, too many slides here. But we want to get, yeah, so here's the fusion of the blood is the main article here. And so this was the original extraterrestrial story from the Golden Mean.info, which is now at Fusion and Blood article. This is just to show that in Rovash Irash, in the ancient Hungarian, the Rovash Irash, the sacred alphabet, the dragon blood of the Hungarian, is actually tetracubic in Hebrew, and the index to their symmetries is the word Enki and Enlil. Oh, hello. And this is Rovash Irash, an old Hungarian. I think that's why the Hungarians were the first to read the Draco language on the caves in Senchi, China, Draco pyramids. This is another relevant and actually useful branching algorithm of which ET cultures were responsible for the various cultures on Earth. For example, the Hebrews. And this is from Stuart Swerdlow, what he learned at Montauk, actually. And it's amazing how these stories fit together. Even talks about the Prism of Lyrae and the Galactic Federation and the Orion Wars and the Draco. I mean, this was all mapped in the Montauk experiences. And this is contained also in the Ur-Elic, original origin of language of Earth. Ur, Draco, El, those who could make the phase shift, the Dravidian, which became the caste system. Aboriginal marriage law and the caste system fit that story so well. This is just a graph, and this is also at the Fusion of the Blood article, showing on the top row going across, you have the names of each major member of the Sumerian Anunnaki family. Anu, the father of Enki and Enlil, and then Enki, who was called Merku.com, and Enlil, and then Thoth. And then you go down, the name in Egyptian for each of those people was Atun versus Amun versus Tehuti. In Greek, it was called Apollo, Poseidon, and Zeus. In Rome, it was called Jupiter and Neptune. In Babylon, it's called Ea and Elil. And Zoroaster is Enki. In Africa, Enki is called Kiliman, and Enlil is called Amun. In the Christian, Enki is called Lucifer, and Enlil is called Michael George, as in gay ogre, dragon, gay ogre, a male dragon, and a Mag is a female dragon, as in Magda. In Norse, Loki versus Odin. In the American, Tam Atun and Mikabo. Mikabo was actually the word for God. And Quetzalcoatl was Thoth. And in Aboriginals, we had fish god and snake god. And in Star Wars, so you see the same family, Enki and Enlil and Atun, become the names of God in virtually every major ancient tradition. And you got to respect Freddie Silva, who says, yes, if you study all the ancient indigenous peoples, they all agree the major turning point, the same for the Templars, was when you could invent a near-death experience, 3 days dead, which is the core of the Templar wisdom tradition. And if you could do 3 days dead and you came back, then you had access to the longitudinal array. You were risen from the dead. Oh, my father had a near-death experience. I kind of know the story. So this is the map of the Ophanim line, which is Ebi, Aku, Wialawa, Dogon, Patal, versus Seraphim versus Uru, Draco, Nephilim, Anunnaki. So you have the two major sides of the family, which is basically Atun, Amun. And talks about origins of the alphabet. Here's the picture I promised you of the heme versus chlorophyll, the difference between the green blood and red blood, Mg, magnesium versus Fe, iron in the red blood. So that you switch one atom and you got. This is about how human coherent emotion braids DNA, which is the turning point. Really, when you use your emotion to implode your DNA, then this is called Song in the Blood. And here's about the psychoactive fields discovered by, all right, I'm going to stop this screen share. So the last slideshow here that was prepared is about, we didn't do the propulsion story, but in the slideshow, I just told that story, but that's at fractalfield.com/propulsion. That slideshow was the slideshow that went with the plasma physics of the 9 advanced interstellar beings. And the final slideshow here is the one that went with the story of how Stargates work. And there are just some visuals that went with there, and that's called Stargates portal key. So if I go to Stargates portal, you should be seeing, hopefully you're seeing a Stargate now. And the liquid surface is the point, and this is the Ophanim-Enochian alphabet around it. And here is Jodie Foster's dodecahedron imploding into the Stargate with a sine waves, atom multiply, and phase conjugate, and liquefy at that surface and propagate longitudinal down the wormhole. We saw this slide, this slide, this slide before. So this is basically the implosion algorithm, which made Stargates and the physics of Stargates. And here's about the physics of gravity and the dodec arrangement of the masses in the universe. And the dodec, is the universe dodeca? Yes, says Nature magazine. Is the universe fractal? Yes, says New Scientist magazine. Well, the reason the universe's masses are dodeca is because you have to do this array. And when you arrange the compression nodes so they're all touching, they're all locked together, then when you touch one billiard ball at one end of the array, a billion billiard balls away, one bounces off. And so that array becomes a communication efficiency. That's the imploding of the DNA. This is the physics of the pinhole camera becomes a metaphor for why John Dee used scintillation for ancestor phone calls, because it's basically a phase conjugate mirror. And phase conjugate mirror, like the Olmec used phase conjugate mirror, the black obsidian, to call ancestors, then John Dee did, etc. So this is from Therify.net, producing lucid dreaming. This is a report on lucid dreaming in the plasma. And you've all seen our pictures of the imploding origin of alphabet. This relates to some nice visuals that Geraldine had. And you see that implosion where the pine cones converge. They get that implosion point. And so this becomes actually the origin of, it's called the alphabet of the heart, the sequence of plasma donuts indexed in the tetranets
self-organizing towards stillness.
become Hebrew.
The donut is organized in the 7-color mass, and that's self-organized golden mean.
So that's actually how you're nesting.
If we tilt that golden mean spiral.
That's actually how, when you visualize a Hebrew letter and fill your optical cortex with one Hebrew letter, the way a rabbi makes a golem, your optical cortex plasma donut is then been phase locked into the right tilt angle to be projected like blowing smoke rings with accurate tilt, which is the physics of all creation, really. and so here you're learning to control the vector directors of control the vector directions of a squirt gun. The only way you can steer when you die, because you will be a plasma donut then. And that's happily ever after. Okay, so I see it is 8:25 here. Maybe we save time for a few questions here. I guess I carried on. I'm looking for my cup of tea. Neil, are you there, or Alan? So I see there should be 5 minutes left. Maybe I'll check the chat window for questions here.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm checking for questions too, Dan. So here's a good question. Have you had direct contact experiences as well?
Yeah, you know, in North Carolina, we had some minor contact with some of the craft, but actually then after I had been known Alex Collier for some years outside of Denver, I had some direct telepathic communication with Visayas. You know, Morane and Visayas are the mystics of the Andromeda. Actually, Visayas had a military leadership role as well. And we did have some direct contact. After we had indirect contact with some of the Pleiadians through the interstellar mediators. Bit of a long story.
Next time. Okay, so here's a good question. Who created the Anunnaki? Did God create them or some other being?
Yeah, you know, I think they themselves could not answer the question, because part of the tragedy of races that did too much cloning and loss of soul was loss of long-term memory. Certainly the Dracos, that's true. And I used to think the Draco were a branch. I mean, the Anunnaki were a branch of the Draco, but I no longer think that's true. I believe, Elena Denon, that both the Draco and the Anunnaki arrived in our galactic sector through the plasma vortex Stargate in the heart of Orion. That is clear. They came through the Orion sector. Everyone agrees. Where they came from, no one seems to know, even themselves. But clearly what they did bring here was some of the most survivalistic blood around, very powerful blood. Unfortunately, it was parasitic. I mean, we would call it parasitic. But the good side was that if that blood is crossed well, we can get the best of both worlds.
Interesting. Do you feel like Enki and Enlil are still here on the planet and underground in any way, shape, or form, or they're gone?
I have a radical view here. I think Enki and Enlil, I think Enki of that soul group became very much intertwined in the soul group of what became Thoth, Hermes, Quetzalcoatl, Viracocha, today literally called the Nine, the returning cedar races arriving in this outside of Jupiter in the Ganymede meetings. So that's Enki Thoth. Now, Enlil, I think Anne Rice was correct, the largest plasma parasite in the solar system called Enkil, which is what sometimes called the Grim Reaper at the time of death, eats the souls who are not shareable. So if you don't die well, there's a large plasma parasite, half the size of the solar system out there ready to eat you if you can't implode and propagate. Remember that if you have bliss implosion, then you're going to toast the parasites. But if there's no bliss implosion in your DNA, you know, in the movie Flatliners, if you died without pure intention. So I think Enlil is literally the largest plasma parasite in the solar system. And unfortunately, this may sound like prejudice, but I think a big chunk of the Jewish religion, sadly, failing to understand that part of the story is a conveyor belt into a plasma parasite. I'm sorry to say.